Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's 𝘒𝘦𝘦𝘯 podcast. And with me today, I have Phil Hord. Phil is the Director of Sow Production and Research for Hord Family Farms. Hi, Phil. How are you today?
Doing well. Nice to be with you today.
Nice to be with you as well. Well, Phil, I know a bit about your family background, but if you wouldn't mind sharing that with our audience a little bit, I think that would be a great start to our conversation.
Yeah, of course. Oh, my family is in our fifth, or if you ask my grandpa, the sixth generation of farming. We have a 30,000 sow fair to finish swine business in Ohio. Our family also farms about 7,000 acres of row crops and uh, feed 1,000 head of beef cattle annually as well. And that's our main core business that we're doing today. You mentioned my title, Director of Sow Production. That's my current role that I serve on for our company. And my main pigs are easy. It's the people challenges that I continue to work with, and opportunities from that angle as well. But I have enjoyed working in this role for about a year now.
And Phil, just to give us a little bit more background, you have a little bit of a unique education background. So while your family farms, you didn't take the typical ag business or agricultural route. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that background?
Yeah, my bachelor's degree is in business finance. So did not. I grew up on the farm, grew up around the animals, grew up around the business, but decided to take a different path for my college career and spent some time studying finance and business management. Actually, did not know that I was going to be coming back to the farm right away, going to college. My parents were maybe slightly untraditional in that way. It wasn't like an unspoken expectation. They very much wanted my sisters and I to go to school and uh, pursue whatever we wanted to do. And if we got to the point where we felt interested in coming back to the farm, that the opportunity was there, with a few stipulations, of course. We It's kind of a unique thing. We can kind of get into that. Maybe some people would be interested. I know there's in family business in general, I think there's that nepotism-ish type approach that is pretty common, but and maybe could still be viewed that way by certain people. But I think my parents were say, hey, work away from the business for a few years, and if you're interested in returning and joining, then that would be great. You do that, or you come back and you start in a sow farm. So and you learn the business kind of from fresh eyes and from a fresh perspective, not just from being in those places, but working in them too. And so that's actually the path that I chose, and really allowed me to learn the business from a new perspective. I think being away from the farm for a while, maybe some people can relate to that as you get new life experiences, new perspectives, and um, so it was a fun time the first few years of being back at the farm.
Yeah, I bet farrowing sows is always an interesting experience.
Yeah, it was. And there's a lot of, there's the technique and the process that, that goes into it that I think we sometimes take for granted, right? It's like, well, the sow's going to have pigs, and that's true, but there's also lots of ways we can continue to improve production and productivity and livability of pigs by how we handle them and the processes that go into the farm every day.
Absolutely. So, Phil, as we were talking, you've talked a little bit about that background where you started basically from the ground up again, and um, we'll go a couple of different directions in our conversation because I actually have a few. But let's first start with when you were working in those roles and still today within your family. This is a multi-generational business. Your family's been in a hog business for many, many generations, as you mentioned. So how do you handle that family dynamic? Because here you are with a different perspective, a different education, quote, the younger generation who has more experience with technology, but yet we have the other family members who have more of what we call that generational experience. And so they've learned from the highs and lows of the business and so forth. So how do you mesh that all together?
Well, when someone figures that out, they can let me know for sure. But I, I think our family, my parents, like I told you earlier, really gave us that choice of if we wanted to join the business or not. And so I think that was very foundational when I think about where we are today. Um, so my parents are currently leading the swine business, and Pat and Janelle are their names, and uh, my dad is currently the CEO, the president of the business, and my mom is on the administrative side. My sister has now joined the business as well, so she works. She chose the option of working away for a few years, public accounting, and she joined our finance and accounting team. So she helps lead that area now. And me being, kind of choosing path to start from the beginning and kind of work in different departments has allowed me to see things from a different perspective, but also start to learn from our people that are working with us and that have been alongside my family for quite some time. We have several on our leadership team that have been around since I was couldn't walk, I suppose. Uh, and I always get reminded of that. I remember when you were this tall. Uh, but really, it comes down to the perspective of the family. Do they want to involve the next generation, or do they not? And I've seen that very much in my parents, where they had advice and counsel on, do you just want to have your children join because that's a comfortable or an easy thing to do, or do you want them to be an active participant in the business, not just operationally, but from an ownership and financial perspective? And uh, I think it was a strategic decision that they made on their part to do that. Has it been perfect? Is everything great, all the time? Probably, obviously not. But I think it's been an interesting journey as I've watched other farm families maybe not have quite that same opportunity that I've had, just from the standpoint of the perspective of the family. So I think that's a really key important piece. And I am going to have to remember that too, as we're building a generational business. You mentioned, my family's been in farming for quite some time, and we are continuing to operate under the aspect that it could still be a generational business. Um, I have two daughters now, and I'm excited. My oldest is almost 3, and she absolutely loves getting into barns, and she's at that place where she wants to hold every pig. So, but that early exposure is something that I had as well. And even when I was that age, our business looked a lot differently, right? Really, the growth of our business has been over the last 20 years, 30 years. And uh, being there and seeing the good and the bad.
What do you think are some keys that have allowed your family to be successful over the generations and through the good and the bad?
I think it's the perspective. I said that earlier. I think it's the perspective on why you're in business. That's one thing, especially recently, my parents have really uh, put a focus on is like, why do we do what we do? I think the classic answer is, well, we're creating food. And that's very true. We think about that. Um, feeding families through sustainable food production is our model, right? Uh, but it's also having a deeper connection to um, why we do what we do. Do we, we have people on the team that are we just here to use them as a means to an end to produce the pigs that we need? They've thought about that differently and set the stage that, hey, they're without our team, then we don't have the farm anymore. I think that's different from we were talking earlier before we started here a little bit about the Charlotte's Web scenario, right? Is that's the picture storybook view of farming, and the reality is that looks so differently today. And so without those people um, that really help make the business run, then that's not. So it's how you treat them. It's economically, right? What are we producing? What are we making and hoping to make a profit for, right? Is it just to continue the betterment of ourselves financially, or or in their position is using business as a mission to support humanitarian efforts and lots of things that maybe publicly we don't talk a lot about, but that's really a huge piece of why we continue to do what we do.
Absolutely. Very good. What about to our quote younger generation of farmers or people that want to come back to their family farms, what pieces of advice do you have for them?
Keep learning and be humble, I think, are the two that I come back to quite a bit. I've had examples both personally in my life, but then also professionally, people I've met along the way that have helped me learn immense amounts of information, and there's still mountain loads to learn. And keeping that mentality of being a continuous learner probably sounds a bit cliche, but I've noticed people that are much older than me, more experienced, that there's a different nature about someone when they really feel strongly about they want to understand and keep learning versus uh, feeling like they've made it and that they know it all. I think that's a key foundation to what I've tried to model. Have I always been perfect? No, but I think that continuous learning is really important. I mentioned earlier learning from our people. That's a humbling experience coming in as a family member of a business, or even someone that has a degree that they feel like they're highly specialized in, right? There's always things that we can each learn, especially from people around us that may not have had the same experiences that we've had.
Yeah, so let's go back to that. You were just talking about working in your different departments and working with people. So you've worked in at least five different departments, I think, since you've been back. And so walk us through maybe some of those departments and what you're noticing in terms of how you bring extra value to your business to keep it sustainable.
Yeah, one area that so I worked in South Farm right when I started back at the business, and then I ended up going and working on our growing side, so working with nursery pigs, weaned pigs up to market, and worked with our businesses. On the growing side is made up primarily of contract producers, so have families that have barns and raise the pigs for us, and so began working with those folks and uh, learned that side of the business, right? It's like once the pig leaves the sow barn, what happens? And how do we continue to work with that pig to make it to market? And so everything from getting pigs started, I was relearning that, learning that from a new perspective, managing that at multiple different locations, right? Having different barns that I was responsible for during that period, all the way up to marking pigs, marking the right ones to get on the truck. And, we sit here today and we laugh about that, but that is the core of what we do every single day. And I have immense amount more respect and insight into how that process goes than if I were to have joined. And it's not a right or wrong way. I really value having that experience that I was able to have. Maybe at the time when I was marking 10 loads a day or something, that I didn't enjoy it as much, but you get what I'm saying as far as it's that stuff doesn't leave you. It only helps to have a better understanding and perspective. Another area I worked in was HR, or what we call team member services, and spend time interviewing and hiring. And up until recently, we had hired all local individuals. So it was very much, local marketing campaigns. A good chunk of our percentage of our people, even today, that come to us locally have never worked on a farm. They don't have perspective of the farm. So that process of getting them introduced to what the farm is like from that Charlotte's Web situation, that storybook, is a challenge in and of itself. And so today I work really closely with our TMS HR team today, being in my role and having a good chunk of our employees under my belt, if you will, when it comes to from a management structure, organizational structure. I think that they have a key and crucial role in the success, not only of getting people hired, but that retaining of those people and helping them to have a team member experience that would be reflective of what we as a family desire to have and to how to treat our people. So those were just two kind of key areas that I was able to help out and work in. And I think it was also more helpful to me, as even it was just me doing the task, right? Being a body, if you will, to get that work done. It was really foundational to my understanding of the business as it is today.
Oh, I agree. I think you have to be in the barns. You have to see what you're asking others to do to understand, one, is it feasible? Two, is it, something that even makes sense at that level? And it builds that respect, right? It becomes that mutual relationship as you're discussing. So I do agree with you. I think that's invaluable time for an owner. Um, some of the other things too that you've been a little bit closely involved with is the change of your nutrition program, and even some in-house research and development. And I think that's really interesting because you're at 30,000 sows, and I've worked with other people kind of at that level, and there's, well, should we have research? Should we not? We know there's value, but we're not really sure what to do with it. So maybe expand a little bit more on what you're doing there in terms of nutrition and that research and development piece.
Absolutely. So I naturally went into kind of this whole moving from different areas, different departments to sitting down, and we said, what is screaming the loudest may not be what is needed the most. So I say that now, and what it meant was economically, the way that we are able to be profitable in the business is obviously through the right genetics and the right health and the right team in place. But nutrition, 60, 70 plus percent of the cost to raise a pig is in that. And up until that point, it had all been external. And it was working great. We had several relationships prior to me being involved with the business that got us to where we were at that point. But looking at it and saying, well, what is the opportunity here economically, and looking at what we could accomplish just in our 30,000 sow system? Because you're right, you're kind of on that brink of, does it make sense to have in-house or does it not? And how do you leverage those resources while still maintaining external consultants and vendors and things of that nature? So got down to it. We said, well, let's start it in a nursery. So we started in the nursery. I carried 50-pound bags of feed for a long time until I said, well, it's time to invest in a specific, research feeding system, and had done that. Hired a team to do some of that, and had also at the same time started a 2,400 head finisher under research as well. Added bins and scales, and it's not just something you dream up and say, hey, we're going to do tomorrow. It's kind of takes that seeing what the potential may be. But economically, if there's producers out there, or maybe there's people working, listeners working in companies that may be of the same size or even slightly larger that haven't been considering that yet, I think it's a really powerful tool to have in your toolbox, where we have a question, we think we know the answer, but let's see what the pigs tell us. Because the pigs are ultimately have the final answer. And I think over my time of being involved, I actually still manage that area now. It's one of my favorite areas, just because I started it up, but it's allowed us to make a lot of decisions that we may not otherwise, in terms of how we formulate diets and how we start pigs, and what products and additives and other things that we may or may not use. So it's been a really important and crucial tool.
I think it's hard too sometimes because we're always so focused on ROI, right? What's our return on the investment? And it's easy to run a study where we try a product and we get a positive response. Well, that's an easy ROI. But I know you run studies all the time, just like the rest of us, where there's no response. And that's part of why we do research, right? Different environment, different feedstuffs, different pigs, whatever can cause a different response. So how do you view those non-responses in terms of your return on investment? How do you, in your business model, build that in?
Yeah, sometimes I think I have the saying often is like, for every like 3 or 4 trials or studies, we get the result we were hoping for. But honestly, every study we get the result we hope for, because we're either not seeing what we thought we should, or we are seeing something we thought we may. So I don't. It's hard to just take one particular thing and say, hey, what's this ROI and how is this going to pay for that? I think it's taking a systematic approach and saying, well, for example, so just this past year, we are trying some wet dry nursery feeders. We have historically been a very dry nursery feeder system, and we're about 2/3 nursery finishing. So we have quite a bit of nursery space. And so I wanted to challenge that model. If you look at maybe a more European model in some cases where we have wet, dry feeding more prevalent, or even within the US, right? There's some systems that have wet, dry, wean to finish feeding scenarios, and just see what the pigs tell us. So I got 12 of those feeders, and we're blocking on top of what those are in the pens, in that room, and we're watching it. And it's interesting to see, what the pigs tell you. Did I have a clear ROI of what that could be when we started? No. But you can extrapolate, okay, if I can get X amount of more pounds on these pigs, well, what does that mean at market? I could have been totally wrong. And we say, well, that was a bad thing to do. But there's a little bit of that leap of faith, steps that we're taking every time we go and do something that we're not exactly sure. From your point, we're taking a lot of university level trials or studies, and we're saying, well, it worked in that scenario, let's try it here. So it's not divorcing that line of work, right? It's rather building off of that work, and that work is so essential, especially for products. If we think about additives, right, that may be harder to justify doing a bigger commercial study on, and a system like ours is able to be done at a university level to have a proof of concept per se, or maybe it is reviewing something that hasn't been done or has been done for 20 years or 30 years, doesn't make sense. And so we build upon that information that's there to the industry. That's really important. We take those learnings, and a lot of times it's repeating those things or taking that concept and making it into how that would operate with our nutrition program here.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, as we're talking, some of the things that I keep thinking about is, Kate, and I'm not knocking anything here, but you have a business degree from college, and you're talking nutrition, and I heard you use the word blocking. And so I heard you use some things that I think about in terms of research. So how do you go from that piece of background to switching over to something else, right? It's vital for your business, and I'm not teasing you at all about it because I think it's commendable. But for others out there who are considering this, right, this is kind of that unknown, right, that they're going to step into, unknown on how to set studies up unless you've gotten a master's degree in science of some sort. So how did you make that leap, if you will, into R&D?
Yeah, we had historically worked closely with K-State and their nutrition group, and Dr. Steve Dreets there was one of our consulting nutritionists at the time. And I think he took me under his wing as one of his informal students because I was very green. And by all means, I do not know. I'm still learning. I've learned every time we do a study, I'm learning new things. We actually had someone that had went through the K-State Masters in Nutrition program, and so he joined our staff here about 3 years ago. Dwight Schock has been doing a phenomenal job, continuing to be creative in ideas, and the execution of these studies is super important, because if we're using that data to make decisions, we have to feel like it's being done to the best that we can, that we have to believe in the data. And so, yeah, it's learning from him, as well as several other consultants that we have, and relationships with different companies and vendors, and just taking that learning mentality. I think it's that leap of faith earlier, but it's also, if we look at any other business, it's probably a really good area to spend a little bit of time, not just money, it's also time and further understanding and pushing into it a little bit, being inquisitive about it. I think that's just how I went about it. Maybe that's me as a person, and my nature is just asking a bunch of questions, but I think it's vitally important to the business as a whole, since we are breeding sows, we're farrowing pigs, we're raising those pigs for market, that we have a good understanding of how we should best feed them. And it's a constant learning process.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Pigs teach me something new every day. So you're not alone.
Genetic improvement and like changes in nutrition profiles of different feedstuffs, like it's all changing. Even if yeah, we could go on for days about that, I guess, but
Absolutely. Yeah, especially with
yeah.
markets as they are right now, right? So
Oh yeah.
that's a whole nother podcast for another day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
which would be interesting, right? Talk about how producers are preparing for the differences. But as we wrap up our time today, really around your family business model and what you're doing there within the business to expand and ensure that you're moving forward for that next generation of family farming, do you have any key points or takeaway points that you'd like our audience to remember from today?
Yes, can't put enough value in having the right people and valuing people that way. Um, Not just looking at numbers. Our business, if we just looked at growth from we're going to add another farm this year, instead of really focusing in on health and on just sheer productivity of the animals that we do have, and making sure we're being as intense with that as we can be, to ensure that we're garnishing that value out of every pig. I think regardless of how many animals you're raising, that's really important, and probably was, or it's not probably, it was very strategic on my parents' part. And as I've joined the business, there's been opportunities to add animals, but does that really contribute to, are we in the place where we can accept that and accept that new responsibility of doing so? Being intentional with that, I think, is a really important, regardless of what business that you're in, is tackling quantity over quality doesn't always give the best results. I think another key aspect is leveraging relationships that you have in the industry, and not leveraging them in a bad way, but leveraging them for the best and learning from each other in those scenarios. I think maybe one more controversial thing that would be done, that my family has done, is try to be transparent with our lenders, and from a business side is have people look at the books. How do we improve these areas? What are things that we're not foreseeing? And yeah, looking at them as key contributors to the success of the business, versus looking at them as people nagging you from a standpoint of working capital per animal, or looking at them as a limiting factor. They're there as a guidepost, I think, a lot of times, to being a strong business. Not, we've been talking a lot about production, but there's a big side of the business that's has to be done from a financial side, and being on top of that. And farmers are required to be experts in a lot of things. I think that's the other thing here that was kind of been an undertone, is health, genetics, nutrition, finance, management, community and government relations, technology, you name it. We could list off a bunch of things that people in agriculture, folks that work in agriculture, have to be focused on. And so finding those people that are hungry, not only to learn but to share, and I think those are things I strive for, and I think what's helped make our business to be what it is today, as I've been learning.
I think those are great key points for sure for the audience to think about and take home, whether it's to a small family farm or even to the large corporations, just to look at it a little differently. So very good viewpoints. Well, Phil, as we wrap up our time, some of the things that we traditionally do is we ask our guest speaker a couple of questions. Everybody gets the same questions. So the first question we ask is, do you have a resource that you might use associated with swine that you would recommend to the audience?
Yeah, there's resources, everything from Ohio, like for us, right? It'd be the Ohio Pork Producers Council. They're kind of regurgitating information that's getting put out every day. As an NPPC SIP investor, we get information from the NPPC side. I think that's a really important thing that I skim every day. There's a lot of, primarily my source of information is quick email snippets of information, and then if something piques my interest, can read further into it. But I think either someone has way too much time on their hands if they can read everything, or you're not interested at all. So I think staying somewhat connected and close to what's happening in the industry is important.
Yeah, very good. How about something that's not swine related? Is there a book or a resource that you might recommend to the group?
Yeah, so we have a group of 25 of our highest level of people within the business, right? So this is everything from crop farming to our feed milling side to obviously sow and finishing portion, and kind of everywhere between office and everything. And we just got done reading a book called Becoming Person of Influence by 𝘮𝘦𝘦𝘱. And it's an old book. It's not a new book. It's not a new sexy book, but ultimately there's a lot of things in that really becomes how to replicate yourself as a leader and other people, and becoming someone that they want to follow versus someone that they have to follow. And I've gained, there's so many nuggets in that book. It's kind of one of those things where you get overwhelmed by how many things you're not doing. But we went around the room for a bit last week and said, hey, what are some key things that everyone, what are some fun things or key things that everyone took away from? And I think that's one book that I've really enjoyed reading recently, Becoming Person of Influence by 𝘮𝘦𝘦𝘱.
I'll have to look in that one. I don't recognize that one, so
it's an older one. That's what you have to get the dust off the top, maybe. Yeah.
Sometimes those are good. So yeah, I'll take a look and see if I can find that one. The last question we ask is really if you can envision somebody in your life that you've defined as successful, what's a characteristic that you believe has allowed them to be successful?
Yes. In America, we think of success, and maybe most places of the world, we think of success as economic success. My family has had the opportunity to be in Central America, some with just some humanitarian and type work that we do there. And I think that the thing that I've come away with is that even regardless of the situation that they're in, they have joy. And so having joy or having just happiness in general, we have a lot of things in this industry that can get us down. Grain, as hog farmers, right? Grain price is up. Of course, it's nice to have some good market pricing, but we've had a lot of disease in the industry here over the last several years, and obviously the looming ASF issue. And there's a lot of reasons to maybe get a little bit down. And so I am constantly reminded of, choosing that happiness, choosing that joy, and having, their worth be in who they are as a person and things they're contributing to the world versus it being something economic. And I really enjoy that characteristic of people.
And I think you're off to a good start. Taking your daughter into the farrowing house and watching her hold baby pigs is full of happiness right there. So that's a great example.
I have way too many pictures on my phone of that. So
I think we all do. That's awesome though. That's exactly why we do what we do, right? So
that's right.
For sure. Well, thank you, Phil, for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. You've given us some great insight and some things for many people to consider. So again, we thank you and wish you all the best with your family business.
Thanks. Nice to be with you today.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.